Welcome back to the Leadership Growth Series. I'm really excited to have someone on today who I had the pleasure of actually going for a walk on the prom with not so long ago. Sheila I'm after forgetting how to pronounce the name. Huron.
Sheila E. Huron.
Huron, and she's helped me learn my Irish, even though I'm from a Gaeltacht area. It's coming quite handy. Sheila, will you tell people about you today? Obviously, I know you from LinkedIn. I've seen all your amazing posts, and I'm a big fan of what you speak about in your podcast. That'd be fantastic.
Thank you very much. It's absolutely lovely to be here, Louise. Thank you. My pleasure. And I too thoroughly enjoyed that walk on the prom. Two-way conversations were always really helpful, and particularly when they're heart-shaped. So I am Sheila Huron, as you said. I have been in education for 30 years. So I was a primary school teacher. I taught in every classroom from junior infants to sixth throughout my time. I was also in middle and senior management. I worked in SEN, and I would have had occasion to work with people that were working in a centre for autism. So I had such a wide variety of experience in my time in education. I then, in positioning myself for an early retirement, I retrained as a psychotherapist. And I have to say that was the most important and significant piece of formal learning I ever treated myself to and involved in my life. And I have been CPDing since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. Since I was 4, I'm in school. And aren't we all in the super classroom of life? So I suppose retraining as a psychotherapist was my chance to realize, oh my goodness, this resonates with me. I know this stuff. I just never knew there was a book or there were books that said what I was screaming to find words for. So I loved that and I got excited about using it. I straddled both worlds for a little while. I went job sharing in school. I began building my private practice. And then when COVID came, it was the ideal time, without being in any way less than sensitive to all of the people that suffered, whose businesses tanked in COVID, and they suffered so terribly, and it was so difficult to get their feet under them again. Mine soared. There was a need for it, and no ambulance chasing intended. There was a need for it. And when you're doing something that is for the higher good, however professional or amateur or fee paying or non-fee paying, it's a really good thing to do. It's a learning experience for self and it's beneficial for others. So I was working away in my private practice. I got an opportunity to retrain again and bring in some life coaching, some business coaching. I've done some corporate training now, and leadership is a huge area of interest of my own personally, for lots of my own personal experience in education, good, bad, and indifferent. And also just because I want to feed into what the world needs right now. And it's crying out for a steer. Children cry out for correction when they're young. And I think us adults are crying out for a steer in leadership. Children cry out in education spaces for a direction to go in that's good for them and will grow them. And I think leaders are looking for, I think they're open to the menagerie of ways that there are to do it. There's no one way to wash the ware. So I'm very interested in leadership, restorative leadership, quality leadership, resilient leadership, disruptive leadership. And I'm working a lot with clients around building cultures in spaces that grow everybody and allow emerging leaders, for example, to find their voice and be heard and seen. So then, in a beautiful twist of fate, when all of that was working so well, I got the chance to bring my inner child out to play. I was offered an opportunity to act in Ros na Rún. So I'm a fluent Irish speaker, as you said. And I'm now acting, and I'm signed to the end of this season with Ros na Rún. So I'm over and back to Spiddle in Galway, which has very much reduced my business in Dundalk, but equally adaptively. It's a fantastic learning ground for me. People are fabulous. The culture in Ros na Rún as a place to work is amazing. It's electric. I'm learning so much, thoroughly enjoying acting, and really hoping, to be honest, that I can lean into this going forward. I don't want to make any huge, I suppose, emotions-based decisions because I'm so excited about it. I want to tame my vanities a little bit. My character hasn't really aired yet. My character appeared in 2 episodes. It's all going to kick off in a greater way now from next week as Shrike vs. Shark starts, so the new season begins. My character is written into the end of the season. So it's so exciting. And I need to just not make emotions-based decisions right now. I want to remember to make values-based decisions. So I'm just settling myself. I'm doing a lot of grounding when I do the work. because I am between Dundalk and Spittle, but I can tell you I am loving it. And for me, 52 is the new 22, because it's never been as good. So much fun, so much learning, and so much quality connection.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. And I love how open you are as well, Sheila, not only to people experiences. You're very much an open heart, and I think things come towards you. And I suppose myself and Sheila were talking before we came on here, and it was a really interesting chat. And there was a lot of things said, and I'd love to revisit some of them because, as I said, I visited Sheila is coming to Galway, and we went for a lovely walk on the prom. And you know, one of those moments when someone, and I've never went for a walk, networking or whatever, and had someone bring me an apple. And once she gave me the apple to eat, I said, right, she's my type of lady. She gave me a lovely apple to eat, which it was thoughtful. I think it was the thoughtfulness behind it, which is what I seen straight away from Sheila. But Sheila is very much a giving person, and that was not only a walk for me, it was very much an insight into you, Sheila, into how your mind works, but also an insight. I love seeing how people word things, and how they explain things, and what their outlook is and perspective. And that really helped me, I suppose, have an aha moment when we were on that prom that day. And what we're going to talk about today, was this vulnerability came up, and I totally was not expecting vulnerability to come up at all on my walk with Sheila, but it actually reared its head in a really nice way, Sheila. And I suppose, I'll give you a little bit of an insight into what happened. So I said to Sheila before we went live, and we weren't going to talk about this at all, but we're just going to go with it, because we're go with the flow type of people. But I had one of those aha moments, and when I actually had it, it was that Sheila had said, I'd said to Sheila, said, what is it? What is your why? Or what is it Louise wants to, what's Louise about? And I answered the question with, I want to help others. And Sheila really turned that around as a coach to me, and said, but Louise, who's given to you? And I really had to think about it, because I wasn't going to answer it. And I was answering it up until that point in an autopilot way. Okay. So I was kind of answering it without realizing it. And I think, our words become our worlds, and that always resonated with me because it's so powerful, Sheila. But when you said that to me, and then we'd had loads of other conversations which got to that end point, right? So it wasn't just said and it was happened. There was a lot said leading up to that. So that was kind of the breaking point where I was like, right, there's something going on here. I was actually starting to listen at that point to what I was saying, not what Sheila was saying, because it's fascinated with what Sheila was saying. And I said that, and I really went home and thought about it. And what ended up actually happening was I signed up to a yoga class. Now, for anyone that knows me, I used to do yoga a very long time ago, loved it, but I never found the time to go back into it again. And if anyone's seen my Instagram post, you would have seen that I went to yoga about a week ago. I went to a fantastic class down in Sawtill there, and it was a beautiful set, and it was a wonderful class. And I just felt so energized within myself first. Now, when I came out of the class, I had loads of missed calls from my son, who wanted me to bring home chocolate, do all, but it was that I had that time to myself, that I wasn't thinking, okay, I need to go home, get my son's dinner, I need to do this, I have someone texting, that it was literally me time, that I was like switched off, and I was so in the moment. It was just amazing. And I had so much energy the next day, and I wasn't really doing a lot of energy things in that room. They gave me a little bit of chocolate, they gave me a blanket. It was a lot of nice breathing. It was fantastic, these lovely oils, but it was just that time that I needed. And I think I never really thought about that, I suppose, a lot until I had that chat with you, Sheila. And I suppose, what's your take on that? Because obviously I'm sharing with everyone my kind of story on it, but obviously you have another way of looking at it, because you were obviously chatting to me along the way, and you obviously were asking those really great questions. So what's your take on it?
Well, my take on it is congratulations and well done, because you did the most important thing you can do for your business apart from for yourself. Because when you can take time out to be still in that space, you allow the body to calm the mind. And when you allow the body to calm the mind, you keep your body physically well and physiologically well. So we had also chatted about the body keeps score and how we can begin to feel sensation in various spaces and places in our body. And if we feel that over a period of time, we're building a habit for that, a habit for feeling it. So we throw off chemicals when we feel certain things regularly, chronically, and it can become a state of body that we maybe call illness or dis-ease if it goes to any further stage. And really what that's doing is it's a message, it's a fax from the other side, it's a fax from the universal intelligence saying, you've got to slow down, you've got to do things differently. There are many ways to wash the ware, fill your cup. And I really believe that self-care is the most selfless thing any of us will ever engage in. And the ripple effect is phenomenal and is limitless. So like you say, you had a number of missed calls when you came out, but you can be very sure you were more capable of dealing with those in a more contained and managed and manageable way because you'd had that time to just be. Sometimes it's enough to just breathe and be. We can very often create a state of mind and body where that which is happening on the inside is at a pace that doesn't match what's happening on the outside. So if people are strolling on the prom and they all look carefree and they're strolling with their friends and they're eating apples, they look like they haven't got a worry in the world. And if on the inside, just, oh my God, I've got to go and I've got to get this home for dinner, and then I've got to send that email, and oh my God, I forgot to send that email. The disparity between what's happening on the outside, which can sometimes look to be at quite an ideal pace, versus how quickly things are moving on the inside, and cause a reason for our body to pick up sensation, inflammation. It can cause our bodies to servant becomes master. Our bodies are supposed to serve our brains and what we think, but the servant can become the master. So we had chatted about building business, corporate training, leadership, public speaking, and all of the things that are very arduous and they require a lot of our spare capacity. But in order to be ready for those, ever ready for those, because our business needs us, we need to earn money to live our lives. We do need to fill our own cup, and yoga is a beautiful way to do that. Breathing, disruptive breathing, functional breathing, cost-free, always available. Innately in our emotional tool belt, we just don't know to reach for it. So when you change your breathing in yoga and stretch and just realize in that time space you haven't got a worry in the world, you then begin to change your gray matter. You change the shape of your brain. We have neuroplasticity. So we can build in positive habits the same way we build in habits that aren't so good for our health and our wellness. So my take on it is that you did a really good thing. My further take in relation to this conversation being leadership based is that within public enterprise, private enterprise, where people are in leadership roles, I think it's very important. I think the epicenter of quality leadership is an awareness that it's very important that people have a cutoff point, that it's absolutely okay to not be in your role-based place all the time. People have stars and stripes, they receive promotions, they have labels, that's wonderful, but they are people behind it, they're not machines, and they have to go to the gas tank of life and replenish their fuel, and they do it doing things like what you did, or meeting a friend on the beach to have a stroll and to just do a little bit of breathing before they do that. So it's most beneficial. People are entitled to be offline as much as they're required to be fully online, and that's a whole conversation in its own right. But to speak to your point, initially I would say you did a wonderful thing, and I would add to that in relation to this being a leadership retail growth strategies for quality leadership in particular. People are dealing with people in retail, so they particularly need to be okay to be offline on occasion, replenish, refuel, and thereby be better at resetting within business when not everything goes their way.
Yeah, I think there's a big talk about vulnerability, and I think vulnerability for places that maybe didn't have that to begin with, and trying to bring that in. And we touched on before we went around, I think it's change really that we need to see if we do have those unhealthy work habits built, you know. And some people, you know, it can be built from, you know, family values. It can be built from it mightn't even be based in the workplace. You know, I know a client that, you know, the CEO is very much switch off your phone, but she's dealing with someone on the exec team, that senior executive team, that just doesn't seem to want to switch off. So for how do you as a leader, do you think, Sheila, I suppose, give them that? Now, we obviously had a walk on the prom. It was, you know, it was, and we got to a point where it was really, really comfortable. But when we're in the workplace, how do we get to that point with teams? Or how do we, I suppose, lead that way? Or what do you think needs to be done in order to encourage that or influence that?
Sure, excellent question. And that's where the change begins, is in these conversations. So conversations are hugely important, the conversations that happen behind the scene. But then you have to be very discerning when you go into business, because, you know, business from 2 to 3 to 12 people versus the big public companies, you know, and maybe spread over many countries. Thankfully, no frontiers now. We can use this space to train. Conversations are important to get the training in place. But once training comes into place, it has to be very structured. It has to be, we need to get into the linear brain then, you know, there's room for the heart-spaced thinking in the boardroom, but it also has to be structured. So what I talk about, what I practice, and what I have phenomenal results from is doing an emotional needs audit. You have businesses everywhere. You have retail. Now, I talk a lot about private enterprise, but a passion of mine going forward is to bring some of this change to public enterprise. And I suppose that's a conversation for another day. It's a very different model, but I really see a huge need for change and a dearth of that training coming into those places by comparison with the training that I see happening in private enterprise. So I think it's hugely important that these conversations happen so that leaders and trainers like myself and yourself go into establishments with a structure in place. We will see health and safety officers coming on site. We will see inspectors. We will see food safety inspectors. We will see all sorts of audits being done in establishments. In my opinion, it's absolutely time to have the emotional needs auditor walking in the door regularly. You can have the doorstep emotional needs audit if I'm employed by your company to make regular visits, to bring a certain amount of hours to the space. And if you identify on a given week or month that there are 3 people who are vulnerable at the moment, they might need some private time with me, I can then feed back to the people that need to hear how things are going for those people. So doing an emotional needs audit with individuals, but equally training within the pyramid of communication within establishments, training groups on how to bring the emotional needs audit into their department, and always having feedback and always auditing from the top down. So with due respect to our leaders, because we're actually all leaders.
Yeah.
In a healthy world, we're all leaders. We need to know that. And we're all leading even from within ourselves. Just the energy that we emit is a leadership energy. And we need to know that. In a democracy, apart from everybody's a leader, you know, and what you say matters, and it, you know, it's going to have a kickback. So, and that's quite attitudinal. So if everything's about an attitude, pick a good one. But that type of generic change has to come from these conversations in the background. And then I suppose the soldiers being dispersed to go into establishments as emotional needs auditors. So to check and see, from the ground up, are people's basic emotional needs being met? But from the top down, are leaders, with due respect and very positively, being audited in their role to make sure that from the bottom up, people are being seen and heard? Also then the innate resources toolkit, check and see who has what going on naturally that's being used in the workplace, who has what going on naturally that hasn't even been tapped into, who has what going on naturally and inherently that we didn't even know they've a talent or a skill set for, who would like to grow their skill set in such and such a department or type of presentation, and we never gave them an opportunity to express that to us. How can we get them into an advancement space? How can we give people training opportunities? So allowing people to use their innate resources to the best of their ability, tangibly and emotionally. By that I mean people being able to have hard conversations. So I talk about when the hard conversations aren't difficult. And if there's a toolkit in place, so coming from the emotional needs audit, where there's very generic language that people accept, because when you use something repeatedly, people can feel a sense of safety in it, they believe in it, and they can put their trust in. So trust, that was another thing we chatted about. Trust is a cognitive thing before it's a feeling thing. So you physically don't trust with your heart. It's a whole relationships discussion that I love having as well, and bringing some understanding to what even is trust. So trust it's a cognition, it's a choice to put it cognition before it's heartfelt. You put your trust into something and then you can feel it quite quickly, or if not, your intuition. So that which you hear, almost like a voice from the inside, your intuition teaches you not to put your trust in there again. So in the workplace, when people are feeling seen and heard, when their emotional needs are being checked in with, but more importantly, when there's a feedback in a quality, adaptive way, leaders and from the top down about what these people have said, in my opinion, you then have safer places where people can put their trust into the system, and the system works better. Profits are organic. Productivity is organic. Healthy, happy, wholesome attitude to life is really, it's addictive and it's intoxicating. And the more you create, it's a bit like insulin in the body, the more you create, the more gets created. That's not always good. So you've got to lean into it to make it good to suit you. It's the same in work. Pick up what's coursing through the veins of the establishment. Note that it won't always be good, but catch it. But the signs are there. There's always a trail of crumbs. So the signs are there. So pick up, be okay with the vulnerability from the top down, of listening to what's working and what's not working for absolutely everybody in the ecosystem. Because within that vulnerability from the top down, there's room for creativity, for innovation, for progressiveness. And there's no leader can do anything on their own. We have to be team. And team comes from that beautiful awareness of vulnerability and weakness. You know, it's genuinely, as I was involved in a fabulous call during the week with a group of people called Livin, a representative of Livin, and their strap line is, it's not weak to speak. I thought that was just so powerful. It's not weak to speak. You're not, it's lovely to be vulnerable enough and safe enough to be able to get in touch with your vulnerability in a strong way. So have those hard conversations sometimes to feedback, look, that's not working for me. I have a skill set in this area. You gave the job to so-and-so. You didn't give me the opportunity to present. I don't want them not to have it, but I'd like my opportunity to do it too. And so we continue to keep the machine well-oiled and moving in the right direction.
Do you think, because I've seen vulnerability, and do you think vulnerability is easier for some people personality-wise than other people? Do you think that that's possible, that you have an organization where it's very much embraced by the CEO, by that top level leadership, but the middle management, one or two of them they just don't really buy into it, I suppose. You have some that are really on board with it and some just how do you kind of, I suppose, win them over in that respect? People that just aren't, they're not really seeing the value of it. Do you think some people gravitate more to it, maybe more open people, maybe more outgoing? We talk about introverted people. Do you think that comes into play at all, Sheila, or no?
I do. I think it's a really important and quite a change-making conversation, Louise. I think it's probably the catalyst for very positive change, not just in business, but in politics and therefore the world over. So it's an extremely important conversation. What is personality? Personality is how you think, how you act, and how you feel. And your personality will determine your personality and your energy field. So can people change? Yes, they can. We have these idioms built into us, can't teach an old dog new tricks. A leopard will never change his spots. Not true. Absolutely not true. I can test all of that. It's not true. And they're not helpful idioms to bring with us into the present day. Neither do we want, though, to be training people to be a certain way, because there are many ways to wash the ware, many ways to do things. And so it's extremely important to understand that all of those human skills are teachable. And we live in a world of digital disruption where we have to turn up. You and I chatted about this as well. Digital is not everybody's cup of tea. It's not everybody's bag of tricks naturally. But we live in a world where we need product knowledge. We absolutely do. We need digital because we're not going to get anything across the line if we don't. We equally need human skills. And can vulnerability be taught? Yes, it can. Can the culture in an establishment be changed positively? Absolutely. When conversations happen in order to leverage mindset changes. But that goes back to not taking people, by the seat of their pants into our way of thinking, but rather just dropping things in, inserting subjectively that there is another way to do it, allowing the emerging leaders an opportunity to speak. You can be sure that the productivity of any ecosystem, from a school to a multi-million-dollar business, will be better when there are times and opportunities built into the running of affairs on a day-to-day basis for the people that might normally not get to do anything other than clock in, do their work and clock out, get an opportunity to speak. The greatest of productivity I've seen happens when there's a voice given to people who normally don't get to sit at the boardroom table. And the beautiful part of that is the vulnerability that's shown from the top down in being open to that. So an open heart is a beautiful way to space. And I chatted with Simon Hyde about this a good few years ago on my podcast, Told One with Sheila, and we talked about love in the boardroom. And it's, it can sound for very linear people, sometimes maybe alpha male, sometimes, left-brained people. Although I really feel the world has changed hugely. I don't know that model is getting by anymore. I think everybody, I really want to say that I think that the world is beautifully awakening, not least since COVID. And I have the greatest respect for all of us who are trying to lean into heart-shaped living. So that's the boardroom as much as it is relationships. And it's about giving everybody their opportunity to be vulnerable. And if you find that you're in a space where people are not vulnerable, particularly if that's in your work and you need to measure the progress, metrics are important. I think it's the job then of certain individuals within departments to notice. Digital will never be taken over by AI because there's always room for the human. The human will notice. The digital doesn't have that observing self. Human beings do. Human doings don't. Human beings do. We can get into our observing selves and notice, there's Louise not, she's not feeling so good today. I don't notice that she's loving her work. She's kind of on the last minute every day. She's a bit late some days, not calling in, not arriving as consistently as she should. I wonder, is everything okay for her? And having the personnel within the space, within the culture as a given, that you're never too big, go and speak to Louise and say, is everything okay for you? What is that like? And never presuming that you know what Louise is going through because you see her sad or not turning up on time. Asking the question, because we can't jump into somebody else's experience. It's not true to say, and again, it might be one of those idioms that we bring with us and we don't maybe check in with it often enough. It's not true to say, I know exactly how you feel. You don't. You can pull from your own backstory what it must be like because you've experienced this, and this, which you think is quite like it. But you don't know why Louise is crying today. You don't know why Louise is last minute every day this week. So businesses can never get too big to stop and say to Louise, I notice that you're on the last minute. I notice you're absent on occasions. You've had to knock off early a few times. I feel that all is not well for you. Is there anything I can help you with? Can we as a business help you with anything? That's asking the question. That's being vulnerable from the top down, and it allows the vulnerability from the bottom up. And apart from the obvious gain, you might help one person. It's worth it if you help one person. You could be very sure in the bigger scheme of things that you'll help a department. And then on the more spiritual level, you'll help the world, because butterfly effect, minute in matter. We make that small change between, middle management and Louise, or senior management and Sheila. If Sheila is at the bottom of the pecking order, you can be very sure that Louise will go home a happier person, or go home a more cared for person, feeling a little bit more cared for, bring the knowledge and awareness of that into her home space, maybe help her to make some values-based decisions at home as opposed to emotions-based decisions because she felt seen and heard for a split second in work. Likewise, when home is safer and or when you know how to access the help if it's not, you go to work and you bring your more whole self to work, and so work productivity is better. So it's very much a two-way conversation with people. Human beings, we're pack animals. We need connection, quality connection. We need to be seen and heard. So vulnerability can be taught. There probably are people whose propensity is more naturally and perhaps environmentally, given their experience, inclined to being open, and open allows for vulnerability organically. But equally, I have great faith in people. And if they're given the opportunity to turn their center towards vulnerability, and if it's taught healthily and wholesomely, everybody's benefit, then I absolutely have the utmost of faith in humankind, and kindness is what it's all about, epicenter of everything that's good. And yeah, people can learn it and bring change. You don't have to hit your rock bottom to learn your lessons. I think that's the healthy thing to learn. You can experience change from a place of love, awakening, to just expand more.
Yeah, I think that's just listening to what you said there. And it's funny because it's we talked about the universe and things showing up, but I done a podcast with Paula King, who is a master coach, and we're talking about coaching and culture, and she said the exact same thing you said, Sheila. So there is obviously something in it, which is it takes, because I said, how do we, I was really pushing back with her with the coaching. People come and they say, I want to do coaching and I want to have a coaching culture. But I said, does it actually happen then when they go back into the workplace? Or is it just, we forget about it, we go on another training day and a few months later and we don't actually implement it as such. So she was saying it just takes one conversation. So it doesn't have to be everyone. If that one person is having, as you said, one of those heartfelt conversations, really trying to connect with that person and see how their day is, it makes a huge difference. And I love that whole idea of everyone has their own way of, there's a way of approaching things. And I think you touched on it. We all come with our own talents. And I remember, and it's funny, but retail is a very slow industry to change if anyone's been in it. Hospitality is quite similar. In leadership is quite hard to change. Like the tech kind of side of things are very much innovative when it comes to leadership. We're still very slow in that whole way of change, I suppose, within it. It's very much, it is quite old in a lot of ways from a change management perspective. But it's just really interesting because we used to do training programs, Sheila, and I used to have managers ring me up and they go, I hired so-and-so, they seemed great in the interview, they're on the shop floor and they're just not approaching customers, okay? And they get really annoyed and they'd say, I go on my lunch break and she's not talking to the customers, the sales are down, blah, blah, blah. So I'd say, observe her, is she comfortable actually walking up to people? Is it? So I think a lot of it, we can change a certain amount, but it's what our talents are. And I think you alluded to that in what you were saying, what do we feel aligned good with doing? So it turned out that girl was very much a methodical thinker. So she moved into the back of house space. She was put in more of an operational role, which she really excelled in. She didn't like the customer facing role, but it doesn't mean we have to force someone to fit into this whole idea of, an all-rounder, or they can do everything. And I think sometimes with certain jobs, because especially retail and hospitality, there's a high turnover, people are trying to get all the hours and the scheduling done, and we try and nearly go, right, we're going to have her cover all of these areas. We want them to be really good at multitasking, really good at this, but it's just not, it's not fair on the person. I think we're selling them short because we're nearly setting up to fail because we're not really spending the time to figure out what they're good at, like you said. And I know it's a time thing, but I think when you get to that point with a person and sit down with them and say, what do you get excited about coming in here to work, and it could be something really small, but by giving them a little bit of that, on a regular basis, it nearly lights a little bit of fire in them, that they enjoy doing that particular task, and it gives them a little bit of excitement coming into work in the morning. So I was listening to what you were saying there. It was really interesting, because I was thinking I always think when someone tells me something, can I actually attach that to a situation of, we talk about prior learning for adults. Everything we do is based on prior learning. And, this with teaching with kids, it's, they're very much, they want to do new things, whereas it's a safe thing. We're always kind of go, well, did I do this before, or how do I bring what I've done in the last job into this new job, because then I'll know how to do it and I'll feel a little bit safe and secure. Before we go, Sheila, there's one thing I wanted to ask. Do you think, we're talking about vulnerability, and I suppose everything is in balance. We talk about yin and yang and all of that. Do you think there's too much vulnerability, and do you think there's a bit of that? Because I'll just give you a quick example. I worked in a place before where the manager was probably oversharing and probably being too vulnerable, to the point where the team were sucking up all that, and it wasn't really healthy. And that's why I'm touching on this, because I think there's always two sides to a vulnerability piece. So I'm just thinking how, I suppose, with that particular person, I wasn't managing them at the time, or I wasn't, over them as such. I wasn't their line manager. But how would you, going in, get that person to pull that vulnerability back a little bit, without taking that from them and having a positive spin on it? Because I'm thinking about that now when we're talking about vulnerability. I'm thinking, I wonder how would that go, those conversations, or how would you structure that conversation if you had to deal with that, Sheila?
Yeah, well, it's again, and that's very real, because that happens.
Yeah.
We live in a world now where, mental health is common language now, which is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
It was a time when it wasn't.
Yeah.
And we had the whole "it's okay to not be okay" movement, which at the time was amazing, because pre that we didn't have kind of a gateway to education. In my opinion, we're now at the point where we really should be piggybacking "it's okay to be okay" as a card, and leaning into our emotional fitness. And so, building our resilience. I always think it's, and you're so right, neurobiologically, we are programmed to work out of patterns. Nothing is new. From the second we're born, we arrive into the world like overwords, bud bugs, and we're just hardwired the neural pathways that we practice. So always new learning goes on top of old learning. Everything that we learn is it's a metaphor for something that happened before. So as we grow and become stronger, we are improving our neural pathways and hardwiring, hopefully, the things that are good for us, and unlearning the things that aren't. So vulnerability is a very important strength, and it is a strength. And then there is that sense that you've suggested, where somebody then is probably bordering on leaky. There's no time and place for oversharing if you're doing your work. So to be honest, that's where we have the Venn diagram within mental health space, I think. And it's not just a workplace conversation, it's a family conversation, it's a romantic relationship conversation, it's a friendship conversation. There's a time and a place as well for quality conversation. And if you find that somebody is, I'm gleaning from your situation, perhaps pathologically vulnerable in a place where there isn't an opportunity to do anything positive with it, as in to give them a hearing, help them to steer, then what you need is the emotional needs auditor coming in to literally go back to that linear process. So it's right brain because it's leaning into your emotional needs, but it's left brain because it's regular and repeated. So is your need for safety and security being met? Is your need for community being met? Is your need for agency, autonomy, control being met? Is it being overmet? We need our basic emotional needs to be met in balance in order for us to be able to access and maintain that sense of homeostasis as persons, and then as people within the workplace. Is your need for status and control being met? Is it being overmet? If it's being overmet, that's not going to help you to be the best version of your lovely self either. Have you got meaning and purpose in what you do? If we gave you the opportunity to go into R&D, would you do better there? Or are you in R&D because you acquired the role because Louise left and you're next in line and it's better paid? Did we not perhaps interview correctly? Because it's never too late to change. And you can, from the top down, change the structure. So yes, absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, there is a time and a place for getting in touch with their vulnerability. There's also a structure that's helpful for a business in terms of giving people the opportunity to get in touch with their vulnerability. And then there's a time when it's actually not vulnerability, it's something totally different. And it actually comes in on the mental health framework. And but you need, that matters. And it matters that it matters in a different way, and it needs to be handled differently. I have a firm belief in the time being now for emotional needs auditors. Like, there's a massive big budget for wellness. I have seen, however, companies who can tell you on a spreadsheet, we've spent this, and this on wellness. And look at the absenteeism, and look at the lack of interest, etc. Look at the discontent, look at the disgruntlement, look at this case, for unfair dismissal. What I would say is, you spent this amount on wellness. What did that look like? Okay, was there a consistency, or was it a tick and flick? Fill in this questionnaire, attend this lunchtime thing online, or maybe people didn't even attend. They ran it in their kitchens in the remote work and went out and did their errands, which is equally important to keep your mental health right. Are you dressing it up and showing up for people in a real and tangible and relatable way? So the consistency of an emotional needs auditor arriving in, having conversations within departments and with whole groups and with individuals to check, literally do that emotional needs audit, scale of 1 to 10 every time. Add up at the end what your score is. Have an indicator. It has to be able to be done in 5 minutes by way of checking in with self, but then making the space to have the conversation that will change for the better. More importantly than anything is the feedback then from each strata within the company to the leaders, the decision makers, so that those problem solving and those executive decisions are made respectfully, and that people in the leadership roles then are able to get in touch with their vulnerability, and they don't see it as a weakness, and they can notice how they're doing it differently will grow that person, will grow the business organically, and let's hope that they will become a little bit consciously incompetent and say, perhaps grow them too, because we're all one. There's no one leader, no matter how many multi-millions they have, no one person is perfect and has it all learned, because if they were, they wouldn't be here. They'd be on the way back to refuel and come in again as somebody else. Just saying.
I love that, Sheila. It's been such a fantastic discussion, and it's been so interesting and really thought-provoking, everything we were talking about today. If people want to reach out to you, Sheila, how do they find you? How do they contact you?
Check me out on TG Cahir. I'm on Ross na Rún as Misha Crystal Duran. I'm presently acting on Ross na Rún, and that is taking a lot of my my manners, my business hours. I am loving it. Really hoping to grow my acting career. So if there are any directors out there, I had the amazing experience of meeting Neil Jordan very briefly now in unfortunate circumstances, and so whilst I was naughty enough to doorstep him, I kept it very brief. I hope I was respectful and dignified. I was very starstruck, I have to say. I had met him previously, so I reminded him who I was, and I took the opportunity to say that I'm open for business, which was a bit naughty and quite vulnerable. Yeah, I mean, so, that's a whole other conversation. I'm like a child in a sweet shop when it comes to acting. I want the big role. I've long since decided that I want to play Matthew McConaughey's mother in the story of his life. I mean, I have this decided.
I love it.
If you're not watching me on Ross na Rún, which I'll be there, I hope every Tuesday and Thursday for the next couple of months at least, I am contactable on LinkedIn and Instagram at Sheila Ihiran, and we can pop the spelling of that into the show notes, because I know the pronunciation is a little bit of a trip hazard. And and my business is Hole in One with Sheila. I operate out of Dundalk, but as I say, my business has shrunk back very hugely at the moment, because I'm throwing my heart into acting, and I'm really hoping to lean into acting for the afternoon of my life.
Okay, fantastic. We're going to see Sheila on lights somewhere. We're going to be, I can visualization and all of that. I can totally see it happening with Sheila. When you meet her, you can see it. She's just gone, she's just going there. So thank you so much for coming on, Sheila, and I can't wait to share this out across. And definitely reach out to Sheila, watch it on TVG. I did actually watch a clip of it. I told her this. Hilarious, really amazing character. And I'm not fluent in Gaeltacht. I did learn Irish, but you don't need to actually be fluent to actually get it. It's fantastic. So even if you are thinking it's no, you will absolutely love it. It's fantastic, and her character is hilarious. I love it. Brilliant character. So thank you so much, Sheila.